This is Adopt Responsibility number 7. I'm Caleb Landis here with Matt Widen, and today we are diving into politics. Most recently this week, I listened to a conversation between Vodi Bauckham and Ali Beth Stuckey, talking mostly about critical theory and Vodi's analysis of how this has progressed from just a worldview held by a few into almost a religion held by many, and in 2020 sweeping up many followers in its claws. I don't know. But it's a really interesting conversation, and I felt like I gained some understanding about critical theory just in a very small way, baby step into understanding that. And what really struck me was Vodi thinking of critical theory as the umbrella under which a lot of things have become culturally relevant and under which Black Lives Matter has risen to such popularity. So that's sticking with me. I'm kind of mulling that over in my mind, and I'm curious, Matt, to know what struck you, because I think you listened to the conversation as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. The thing that really struck me was just how he at one point he says to Ali Beth Stuckey. It's funny. I know how to pronounce his name, but I don't know if I know how to pronounce her name. Ali Beth Stuckey, probably. Anyway, he says to her something like
Like the simplest name to pronounce ever. It's funny,
Stuckey.
like she
Should be like
has a complete 100% phonetically correct name, and he does not. He has like a 0% phonetically correct name, and you're more confident saying is. But I love it. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, okay. At some point he says all the ways that we criticize cultural Marxism, that's just not really that helpful in regular conversation because nobody knows what you mean. It's even though that might be a pretty good way to describe things, it's not the exact right way to use the term critical theory. Is like really that is the core of what's going on. So just to say that things are like cultural Marxism, like the ideas of Marx spread out towards the rest of culture, that's kind of getting to the idea, but we should kind of avoid that verbiage. And that struck me because that's kind of how I generally have been thinking about all this kind of oppressor versus oppressed narrative that's playing out in culture. So yeah, that struck me just like, okay, so I need to have a better grasp of like the theory behind what I would term cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about critical theory. I heard a lot about critical theory from I can't remember the guy's name now. I'll look it up real quick. The guy who with Peter Boghossian. James Lindsay, that's his name. I heard about it a lot from James Lindsay, who has some really good conversations on YouTube. He's had a few with Joe twice. He's been on Joe's podcast, and
nice.
The most recent one was awesome. First of all, do you know who that is? James Lindsay,
No.
Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose.
I don't know who any of those people are.
Okay. I feel like maybe we covered this in the podcast. Tell me if we did. Maybe we didn't. If we didn't, then this is glorious that I get to share this with you. So James Lindsay had this idea like 3 years ago. So he was like an academic, and so was Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose. So the three of them decided that in the realm of like sociology and psychology and stuff in the university, things have gone so far out of the rational like window that they were gonna basically pull a huge hoax on the university. Have you heard about this?
No.
Dude, this is amazing.
You're getting me so excited though.
I'm so glad I'm the one who gets to tell you about this. So they had this massive hoax where they all pretended to be totally serious and write all these papers. Let me look it up.
Oh no.
Write all these papers that all the critical theorists would love just to show how like illogical they are.
Oh man, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So I'll find a couple of the best articles and I can read some of it to you. But before I do that, why don't you just kind of explain what critical theory, kind of the theory of critical theory. Like, what is critical theory to begin with?
Well, I actually think my understanding of it is pretty simple. It's probably more complex and goes a lot deeper in a number of ways, but from what I understand, it seems like the critical theory was developed by the Frankfurt School in Germany, and that was where Karl Marx, and also I think Hegel too,
Yeah.
were trained. And so,
Hegel was Marx's mentor, wasn't he?
right, yeah, 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 his mentor and then collaborator as Marx came into his own. And so basically, my understanding is that critical theory views the whole world as oppressed people and their oppressors. That is the way you define things. And number one, above everything, is this fits into our last two podcasts ago really well. But everyone's defined by their group. Everyone is not just an individual who is sovereign over their own
Mm-hmm.
identity and choices, but you are the product of the groups that you belong to. And yeah, that the people who are in less successful groups are there because of injustice, and the oppressors are in their position also because of corruption and greed.
Yeah.
And so it's this very divisive way of seeing the world. And so that's where Karl Marx and Hegel came out of and developed their own theories and expounded a lot from that simple idea, and
Mm-hmm.
took it out into developing ideas for a form of government that would respond to that theory.
Hmm. Huh. Yeah. So I would say, in all of what you're saying, it's almost like you just break down the world into power relations. It's about who has power and who doesn't have power. And so it's not
Exactly.
about rationality. It's not about facts. It's not about
Hmm.
history, even. It's just about who has power, who doesn't have power.
Yeah.
And then breaking down, okay, this group has power. They must automatically have
Hmm.
oppressed people to get that power. It's almost like a net zero, like zero sum view of humanity, that
Hmm.
if one person is rising, the other person must be falling,
Yeah.
which, is totally against reality. That's not how things work. As one of us rises, the rest of us rise, in regards to them.
Another thing that,
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
so one last thing that stuck out to me, I didn't mention in my first explanation, Vodi was saying that a lot of, yeah, like you were saying, a lot of logic, a lot of statistics um, get thrown out the door. I don't know if this was part of the original intent of critical theory, or if this is just what's happening now for people who align themselves with critical theory. But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of, yeah, statistical information, data, just isn't as important as people's personal experiences. And so
Right.
narrative replaces truth. And so people's own personal truth, or their perception of their life experience, trumps what's actually going on in the world. So a really good present example of this is that from a lot of major news outlets, you would think that white police officers are roaming the streets of America right now, just hunting down black men. That's
Right.
kind of the narrative that is very important to people who are thinking in critical theory right now. Um, that's not true. It's
That sounds crazy.
not even close to
That
true.
It sounds crazy, but that is literally what lots of people do think. And if you think about like massive celebrities like LeBron James literally tweeting out the words, "We are literally being hunted down by the cops."
Yeah,
Like that, I don't know if you saw that he had tweeted that, but it's like that's such a good picture of it. Doesn't I would say that's such a good picture of exactly what you're saying. So
yeah,
yeah, go on. Sorry.
exactly. Well, right, but so the data doesn't show that at all, and they're actually. I don't want to get into the weeds of all the statistics, but one really important one that really sticks out in my mind is that for, I think, in the last year, so 2019,
2019. Yep.
I believe this is the year that the statistic is from. There in terms of unarmed people shot by police, there were 9 black men, or people. Maybe some of those were women. I think there were actually 9 black people, 19 white people. And these are categorized as unarmed shootings.
Mhm.
However, even within those unarmed shootings, one of them I know for sure was a man who was fleeing from the police in his car. It was a
Mhm.
what do you call that? Car chase, and he had a loaded weapon either on the seat next to him or in the glove compartment, and so that also is counted as an unarmed police shooting. Um,
Yep.
just for example. So anyway, not to get too much into that right now, but that's kind of the another aspect of critical theory is that narrative and people's personal experiences and their feelings about what's happening is more important in how we proceed socially and politically, economically than statistics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a rejection of statistics in a lot of cases. And there was, maybe you already saw this, but there was the, I want to say, the Journal of African American Studies or something along those lines. I wish I knew exactly what it was, but it was kind of like a an academic paper from the perspective of, I don't even know who wrote it, but it was saying from the perspective of the oppressed, um, and it was all about Black Lives Matter, it was all about race, and it basically said that here are a number of values which are white values, and some of those were like being hardworking.
Hmm.
Some of those were just general conscientiousness, and then another one was adherence to like facts and statistics was like a Western culture value.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like at some point it's rational along the way to understand both sides of a paradox, so to speak, understand both sides of a story, understand, but at some point you have to disengage from something like critical theory. And I think at the point that there's blatant rejection of science or blatant rejection of facts, I think that's a pretty good point to draw that line.
Hmm.
Okay, let me read some of this to you. So before we get into any of the weeds or anything, I don't want to miss this opportunity. So, yes, these 3 American heroes, James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian. So they were academics and they saw what was going on in grievance studies, and they just said, we need to shine a light on the world. Doesn't matter what kind of trouble we get. And so let me read some of this to you. I'm reading off of the New York Times here. Okay. So one paper published in a journal called Sex Roles said that the author had conducted a 2-year study involving thematic analysis of table dialogue to uncover the mystery of why heterosexual men like to eat at Hooters. Another, from a journal of feminist geography, parsed human reactions to rape culture and queer performativity at dog parks in Portland, Oregon. And the dog parks one was one of the best. Before I keep reading the dog parks one, so basically what they did, they wrote a paper and they claimed to have watched the interaction between male and female dogs in a dog park in Portland for 10,000 hours over the course of a year, which is like an insane amount of time. It's like many hours every day. And they claim to watch all these interactions and then inspect the genitals of like 10,000 and something dogs after their interaction. And what they found is that, just paraphrasing, what they found is that if the dog had a gay owner, then he would be okay with its dog performing however he wanted at the dog park, like raping or humping guy dogs and girl dogs. But if there was a heterosexual, if there was a heterosexual dog owner, that he would be not okay with that. That a male heterosexual dog owner would try to shut down. He'd be like, "Oh, don't hump that male dog." So they found this. This is like the ultimate finding of their study, and they write a paper about it called, it's called. Let me read it to you. Human reactions to rape culture and queer performativity at dog parks. And it was basically saying like, if we weren't so homophobic, then we'd let our dogs do what they want to do, which is get, dogs want to be gay. We're trying to shut down like dog, performance. Anyway, and so this paper, not only was this paper peer reviewed, this paper was accepted, and then it was given an award for outstanding scholarship by the university. Another paper, a third paper, I'll keep reading here. While a third paper published in a journal of feminism, feminist social work, entitled "Our Struggle is My Struggle," simply scattered some up-to-date jargon into passages lifted from Hitler's Mein Kampf. So they took direct quotes from Mein Kampf, and they basically said, instead of saying like the Jews are terrible in this way and that way, they just put in like men are terrible in this way and that way. And they basically just took words from literally from Mein Kampf and
Oh
made it
my
sound feminist.
gosh.
Yeah, and that one was
No
accepted.
way.
That's another one that was accepted. Anyway, so they just kept doing this for months, like 9 months or something like that. And then it came out, that it had been a hoax. And obviously many people just felt betrayed, and they felt pretty bad for like betraying a lot of their friends. But they just felt like it needed to happen to show how ridiculous the grievance studies department of universities has become.
Wow. They were right. That did need to happen. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I mean, in one sense, on one hand, I can't believe that. On the other hand, that just makes total sense that it
Yeah.
happened exactly the way it happened.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so sad though. Oh, man.
Yeah. So
That's
then,
kinda
some of those
depressing.
journals, yeah. So then some of those journals had to retract the articles, but it's kind of like, the cat's out of the bag. You literally published all this stuff.
Dang,
But the
man.
thing that happened in the midst of it is, in all of this studying and trying to understand what people believe, James Lindsay actually developed a really solid understanding of critical theory. So I just watched some YouTube videos of him talking about it. He's been in good interviews with random, podcasters, YouTubers. And then he was in, a really good interview with Joe Rogan, I don't know, a month ago or so. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot for you and I to learn about the actual theory of critical theory and kind of like the religious doctrine of it.
For sure.
But just kind of pinning that as a main kind of worldview in opposition to the regular Western traditional worldview is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And that, I mean, what we were talking about right before you started with all of that, how narrative just becomes more important than statistics, than reality. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I just feel like I don't know what to do with that. I feel like have been laughing at that, but I also am just like so sad at the same time that I feel like academics just can't be trusted. That's the feeling that I have, and I hate that I genuinely feel that way.
Yeah.
I grew up with, so my dad has his PhD in sociology, actually from the University of Michigan, and my mom has a master's degree in English. Yeah, I think so, from, I believe, Eastern Michigan University. So, I grew up in a family where there's a high value for education, and these stories, these articles that got published and received that kind of attention, just kind of depresses me, bums me out about that whole system. And I don't know what the road back to having higher education, having university study actually be beneficial and good. And I don't know how we get back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like the STEM fields are still pretty reliable. Worlds that actually sorry, what did I say? STEM fields that actually like work in the real world. Engineering, you actually have to work in the real world. It's very grounding. There are things kind of going awry, and like I've heard of things kind of going awry in like theoretical mathematics and stuff like that. But really, in general, like the STEM fields are still pretty trustworthy, I
Mhm.
think. But yeah, anything to do with sociology, especially in America, especially probably in the last 8 or 10 years, man, it's just, yeah, I feel the same way. It's like anything coming out of sociology, uh, s- probably most of psychology is just gonna be tainted. A lot of it's gonna be tainted with,
Mhm.
yeah, really. I think it comes down to this critical theory kind of religion creeping in. But yeah, it's in my mind, the way I've thought of it previously has kind of just been like Marxism in general, because I know, for example, in America, 1 in 5 professors is a self-proclaimed Marxist. Have you ever heard that? Did you know that?
I think I have heard that somewhere before, maybe from you, but, yeah, that's pretty shocking. 20%.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's self-proclaimed. That's out in the open. "Hey, I'm a Marxist." That's not, "Hey, I probably wouldn't call myself that, but my ideas are almost fully shaped by that," like a closeted, Marxist.
Hmm. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
probably makes
Exactly.
up
It's
another
not.
significant chunk.
Yeah. It's not people who fully understand the evils of the ideas that Marx professed. The other thing that I feel like Vodi,
Vody.
Vodi, Vodi,
Just think everything with phonics that you ever learned, just the opposite of that.
Vodi.
Vody Baucham.
Um, yeah, Vodi Bakum. That's what I thought it was. I should have just said that. Vodi. The other thing that I like that he said was something in regards to that. Now I've lost it though, so whatever. Uh, let's go straight back to that bit of the conversation. Like I feel like you gathered a lot from him. So in that conversation with Ali Beth Stuckey, what kind of stuck out to you? What do you feel like you're learning? What has what have your eyes been open to through that conversation?
Yeah, well, so Vody is I don't want to get his title wrong. I think he's the dean of theological studies at African Christian University in Zambia. From what I understand, that might be the wrong title,
Hmm.
but I'm pretty sure it's the right country and the right university at least. Um, anyway, he's a theologian and has been a preacher, and he's been thinking about these ideas for a number of years. So it's interesting to me to hear him say he's actually been conscious of critical theory and how directly it flies in the face of Christianity for quite some time. And so he's been
Hmm.
thinking about that and preaching about that and talking about it for a long time. And just now, as it seems like this tide of uh, people who align themselves with critical theory is coming in, he he's already been thinking about those things, and so he has a lot of personal wisdom that he's gathered over years, rather than a lot of Christians like myself who
Yeah.
are just starting to think about these things or just starting to be aware of this worldview that is very opposite of the worldview of Christianity. And so it's interesting for me to hear him say he actually sees it now playing out as a contradictory religion, even to
Yeah.
Christianity, and how it's become this this religious system where the goal is, you know doing the work of anti-racism. I think were his words in the interview.
Right.
He's saying that
Hmm.
is salvation. That is the ultimate. That's what you do. That's how
Yeah.
you know fulfill your purpose. So that's how you be a good person in this religious system, is to do the work of anti-racism. And so there's no forgiveness. It's not like, hey, you're doing the work of an anti-racist, so now you're forgiven and you can move on and with your life and be free and happy. It's no, you do that work and you keep doing it because you're evil, because you're white, because you're part
Yeah.
of this group of oppressors. And that really struck me. I just feel like I've seen uh, a number of Christians be way too open to that way of thinking, and it's really hard because as Christians, we follow after Jesus. Jesus was on the side of the oppressed. He came for people who were broken and hurting, in his words, people who are in need of a physician, not people who are already well. He came to bring
Yep.
restoration, came to bring healing, he came to show a better way. And so, naturally we want to align ourselves with that, but it's just like it's this really um dangerous, like, alien version of compassion, of empathy, of restoration that Jesus came to bring. And I think, so anyway, I just think it puts us in a hard spot as Christians to differentiate between these things. And it seems
Yeah.
like with critical theory, it seems so compassionate. It seems so in line even sometimes with things that Jesus said or things that Jesus taught. But when it really comes down to it, there is this whole other worldview, and even borderline religion that people need to be, especially Christians, need to be wary of aligning themselves with.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely agree with you. I was thinking this week about just the word social justice and how if you put the word social justice instead of just the word justice, like whatever difference there is between those two is injustice. So to the degree that social justice is different than regular justice for the individual, that would be the degree to which social justice is actually unjust. So what I mean is if you look at social justice, the idea is we want to be, justice for the individual. Yeah, sure. If one individual does something wrong, he should pay. If somebody else does not do something wrong, they should not pay. Social justice is to say this group of people has done something wrong, so they should pay. But when you actually play that out, what it means is individuals in that group who didn't do anything wrong. And so that's where you get the ideas, like we've mentioned before, the idea of reparations, where it's the, I think the furthest that the thought of reparations has really gotten is something along the lines of this group of people will decide to define you by your skin color, and then we'll decide to define this group of people by their skin color, and then we'll draw some arbitrary line between the two. And this people were bad to this people many generations ago, implementing slavery, and then a couple generations ago with systemic racism. And maybe some of them are racist too. So what we should do is just chuck out that whole pile, and we should have
Hmm.
social justice. But yeah, it struck me this week, like, oh, all this talk about social justice that people talk about is actually unjust.
Hmm.
Does that make sense to you? Like, are you
Oh
feeling that
yeah.
the same way I'm feeling that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, as you were saying that, I think that could be the script for any number of regimes throughout the 1900s and the ensuing genocide that followed them. I mean, it's the
Hmm.
same idea. Hey, this group of people is evil because of their actual wrongdoing or their perceived wrongdoing. And
Yeah.
so, they need to be extinguished. They're less than human, or even if they are fully human, they've done so much wrong as a group, not as individuals, but as a group, that
Hmm.
they, as a whole group, need to be either slaughtered in killing fields or carted off to gas chambers and killed that way, or,
Right.
pick however number, starved to death, however many um, different ways people were killed because of belonging to a certain group in the 1900s. I mean, this is why the 1900s as a century is why it's so dangerous to think this way. We've had this lesson so recently in human history, and yet seems like people are so willing, and so eager even a lot of the time to still think that way. And I don't
Yeah.
fully understand it. I don't know. I'm at a loss, I feel like, for why we've just neglected understanding the lessons of the last 120 years of human history, and
Yeah.
not
That's
taught
such a good
them
question.
thoroughly and not had solid understanding. Like, I was just talking to a friend the other day, and I was talking about Mao Zedong, and he was admitting to me that he hardly knew anything about Mao Zedong. And I'm no historian. I don't know all the details of his life and all of that, but I'm aware of the absolutely horrible human suffering that came as a result of his life. And we're just not taught that in the way
Yeah.
that we should be. And so I think it's wound us up at this place where, yeah, we are way too willing to still think on these in these terms, and in this way that's resulted in such horrible things.
Yeah. Did you know that Mao coined the term politically correct?
Did he really? That came from him.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, it came from him. I mean, it sounded different in Chinese.
Yeah, I would assume so.
But yeah, no, that's his verbiage.
Wow.
It's yeah, which is insane. It's insane that, then in the 90s it was, accepted in the Western culture. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's such a good question. Why don't we have that story in our kind of collective psyche? The story of when Marxism has gone wrong. But it's also like there's something about it more than just the fact that academics have purposefully not told the bad side of Marxism. That is definitely part of the story. But
Mhm.
there's also something to it where it's like it's just so crystal clear when you look at what happened in Nazi Germany, or when you look at the rape of Nanking, or if you look at certain evils. It's just so clear how they went from the bad idea to the bad outcome.
Mhm.
But when you look at Marxism, and when you look at socialism, and the communist revolution, it's a lot harder to make the connection between what they said, which is care for the oppressed, and what happened, which was murder, genocide, and evil. And like that's part of why I wrote that thing that we covered last podcast, is trying to like
Mhm.
understand that connection. There is this psychological thing where you want to equate people being successful, in the hierarchy, with being morally evil.
Mhm.
But it's just so much less powerful than just like Hitler just being so direct. This
Mhm.
group they're rats, they're evil. It's almost like when things go too far. I've heard it put this way: when things go too far on the right, it's so clear to us. But when things are too far on the left, we don't have a good definition for when does a line get crossed in the same way.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I think that part of that is because from what I've seen so far, and I should say I'm not fully convinced about quite anything. Maybe there are a few things I'm pretty politically convinced of, but in general, I'm still learning so much. I feel so young in political understanding and all that. But what it seems like
Hmm.
is that on the left there are generally ideas that are easier to accept, um, like way easier to accept. For example, like free quotes, free healthcare for all or free college for everybody. Those have been big talking points on the left
Yeah.
in America over the last couple of years. I mean, that's really easy to sign up for, but how are you going to do that? And then, even ideas that are further to the left, like, um, you know, equalizing things, ideas like reparations, ideas moving more in this direction of the communist idea of, hey, let's level the playing field. Let's like get
Hmm.
everything even. Let's correct this wrong that's been done. All these oppressors who are wealthy, doesn't matter their personal history or background or anything, but they're rich, so by default, let's bring them down. Let's raise other people up, even though that's never ever been done in all of human history. You've never brought the rich down and the poor up like that. It's uh but it's easy to sign up for. And I feel like
Yeah.
on the right, there are ideas that are harder to accept, they're harder to sign up for, but actually tend to work a lot better from what I've seen. Um, and from, the history that I am aware of. And it requires a much higher level of personal responsibility. I just think of the middle class in America a few decades ago and how there was this not that I was around to see that, but from what I understand, there's just this feeling of, man, I mean, it's the American dream. You can come in at the bottom, or you can come in close to the bottom, or somewhere in the middle, and then you can win in that system. There's this opportunity to elevate yourself in terms of socioeconomic status, and there's freedom, but
Hmm.
you're responsible for that journey. You're responsible for making it in that system. It's not somebody's not just going to drop something in your lap and say, "Hey, there's this free college," or, "Hey, there's this completely free healthcare. Here you go." There's actually a process that involves lots of hard
Yeah.
work and determination and responsibility. So yeah, I think that plays a lot into it, where it feels like on the left there are ideas, policies, that are very easy to buy into, but don't really work the way that they're supposed to almost all of the time. And then there are ideas on the right. And I'm not saying I agree with every single idea on the right, but just in general, the someone who's leaning to the right more politically would be on the side of more freedom and more opportunity, but you have to take the bull by the horns and go out and make it happen.
Yeah, that's really good. Good summary. I think I would say, in regards to that, I would say that the proper role of the right politically is to maintain the structure that is already there. The proper role on the right would be to look at the structure of society and to do what it can to preserve that. Then the proper role of the left is to look at the society, look at the structure of society, and see the ways that it needs to be updated and to challenge the structure and have it be updated. And so part of that would be the care for the dispossessed.
Mhm.
Every structure is going to leave a certain amount of people at the bottom. Every structure is going to leave a certain amount of people who are in trouble, and they need a representative, and that should be politically, that should be the left. And they haven't really been focused on that. They kind of, I would say, they kind of abandoned like the working class maybe around 2012 or so. It seems like there seems to have kind of been a bit of a shift. And so yeah, I think it's important to even just lay out, like, do you think that's too simple, or do you think that's a good kind of starting point as a way to look at the proper role of the right versus the proper role of the left?
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to look at it. I think the fact that it's simple makes it good. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's how I've thought about it. The way that I see it is exactly how you're describing.
Yeah, David Hume had, I think it was a book or something. I don't even know. I didn't read it from him. I've only heard about it, like, I don't know, tons of times since then
Mhm.
from people. David Hume had the idea, or he had the analogy that the difference between someone on the right and someone on the left is they walk into a forest, and in the middle of the forest there's a fence, and the person who's on the right asks the question, "Why is this fence here? I better not touch it. Somebody's probably doing something here." The person on the left says, "What the heck is this fence doing in the middle of the forest?" And so they tear it down. And so I guess that's maybe a bit disparaging to equate, somebody on the left with disintegration, because I think there's disintegrationists on both sides.
Mhm.
But I would also say, in my life experience and from the 2010s, which has been the time that I've kind of been awake to this stuff,
Mhm.
last like decade or less, I would say that's most of what I've seen in the popular world coming from the left has been, more disintegration. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. Had you ever heard that analogy?
No, I never heard that one. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, the saying that was coming to mind though when we're talking about the roles of right and left. I mean, it is. It's important for the left to exist. I mean, I would even say that if we're thinking, it's not like 100% correct on the right or 100% correct on the left, and we're all just like
Mhm.
tug of war, like fighting in between, and hopefully what ends up in the middle is the right way. I actually do think there's a legitimate role, and there are legitimate pieces to the platform of both sides most of the time in
Yeah.
America. And so, but yeah, I've heard people say before, I don't know who to attribute this to, but that if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart. But if you're not a conservative by the time you're 30, then you have no brain.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that to me, I mean, it does seem like a lot of the things that the left should stand for are these compassionate responses to people who are left wanting by the system. And so we do need that voice. But I think for uh, the majority of ideas that I agree with, I should say, or I feel like even a majority of the responsibility in the way that I understand the roles of the right and the left falls to the people on the right to actually stand for what's, to be setting a high moral standard. That's what I've seen most of the time from the right, much more so than on the left. To be standing for uh, hey, let's be a little more cautious. And we've, things have not been perfect, but look around to where we are right now in human history compared to any other time and place in human history. I think we're doing something pretty good, maybe better than, arguably better than it's ever been anywhere. And
Yep.
so maybe we shouldn't just burn the system down. Hey, maybe we should just make smaller tweaks instead of, taking a sawzall to that fence in the middle of the forest.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of the reason that the left is so necessary is because once the dispossessed get dispossessed enough, then their only option is to flip the board game.
Hmm.
And so if people stack up too much at zero, and if this is what we are talking about the other day, like there are, legitimately people who get to zero. There are people who the example I gave was the handicapped child whose parents die and they're stuck on the on the side of the river in
Hmm.
Tanzania. So I guess different country, it doesn't really work that way. But say in a country in America, if enough people get dispossessed and they're not being taken care of, then especially for young men, if enough of them um, aren't being taken care of, which I would say is more the role of the political left, then yeah, then they get left behind in society, and then the only answer for them is like, hey, let's like f this, let's throw this board,
Yeah.
and we can reset, and
Yeah.
maybe in the next iteration we'll have a better, we'll end up in a better place than at the bottom. Like, what are the chances we're gonna end up at the bottom again?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and so what's interesting to me, and part of what we're talking about, how this plays into understanding American politics and what's going on right now, is that I feel like a lot of people, or I should say, a lot of Republicans in America, um, I think actually are in favor of that voice being heard on the left.
Hmm.
I haven't heard Republicans coming out and saying, "Hey, let's just completely get rid of Medicaid," or "Hey, let's just these parts of the social safety net that we have." These people exist, I'm sure, or people who are more towards the libertarian side of things. But I think most of mainstream Republicans would say, no, we do need a social safety net. It needs to exist. It just shouldn't be out of control, and it shouldn't exist to the point where it's getting out of hand and creating this big government that was not the intent of
Hmm.
the American experiment. Um, this also plays into the overall job of government and what you think it is. I think, to me, the way that I understand government is that the job is to protect people and their rights, protect the citizens' rights, both from outside threats and from each other and domestic threats. Um,
Hmm.
I think when you take that role of government, I mean, it's a important job, but it's not a huge job. You don't need this enormous machinery to to make that happen.
Yeah.
Um, I think on the left, it seems like there are people who think the government's job is to make my life as close to perfect as possible. And so I think that's just a difference in
Right.
approach and understanding. And so if one group of people is thinking, the government's job is to provide freedom for the people, protect the people, and, make sure that justice reigns supreme and that people can't just violate each other's rights. Um, that's going to be one approach, and it's going to lead to a much smaller government. But if you have, hey, the government's job is to make my life perfect, or at least as close to perfect as can possibly be done, then you're going to think, oh, every time something is a little bit discouraging or hard, you're going to think, wow, man, why do I have to work for this? Or why isn't college just free? Like, shouldn't college just be free? That'd be easier for me.
Yeah.
That's a thing that feels wrong in my life. And so it's the government's job to give me a free college education, as an example. So yeah, I think they're going to lead to radically different approaches, and radically different sizes in government.
And then the other thing I would say, that the other dichotomy that's split between the right and the left in regards to the view of the role of government would be, like you said, I would say the same thing that you said. The role of the government is to protect life, liberty, and property. And anything outside of that is outside of its scope and starts to create more problems than it's trying to solve. But on the left, I think a lot of people just view that the government is the enforcer of the mob. It is the
Mhm.
the government should just enforce what the majority of people want. And that's what, like, I asked somebody recently over this summer, I asked somebody, what do you think is the role of government? And that's what they said. They said the government should enforce the will of the majority. And I think we mentioned this on one of the other podcasts. That can become its own problem.
Mhm.
It can become mob rule. And so without those rights that you've already agreed upon as a society, and then implementing government to protect those rights, then yeah, you can get, 51% totally
Mhm.
taking over, taking control, and ruling over the other 49%. There's nothing to stop that.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, I heard someone talking about true democracy and how that doesn't actually work. So I guess democracy was an idea of government developed by the ancient Greeks, and when they tried it, they just said, "Hey, the majority opinion should rule. We take a vote.
Right.
51% thinks thinks one thing. Forget the 49% and what they want." um, that would
Right.
be the truest form of democracy. So what we have is oh, sorry, and I should say that what they found out is that that actually ends up in exactly what we were talking about. It's mob rule. Whoever has
Yeah.
slightly a slightly bigger group of people in agreement, they're just going to dominate and rule over the other people. So that's a reason for a number of the systems that we have in place in America. That would take a long time to even go into, and I'm probably not the best
Yeah.
person to even explain all of those. But so what we have is actually a form of modified democracy. So it's
Yeah.
democracy, but with a system in place for checks and balances to
That's
keep
just
things in order.
democratic republic, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
yep.
I think that's the difference. The republic is that it recognizes the rights of the smaller groups of people, that it recognizes the rights of each state,
Hmm.
and that's why you guys have like an electoral college and stuff. Anyway, so with the rest of this little podcast, why don't we do what we did last time? We were talking near the end, towards the end, we started to talk about abortion, and I think it's actually really useful for us to be explicit about politics, be explicit about what our political beliefs are, where we stand in different policies, and then we can kind of work our way through that conversation, and yeah, see where the chips fall. So
Dun dun
why don't
dun.
yeah? So why don't I just pose a couple questions to you? So
Oh, here we
like you
go.
said, like you said, I feel the same way as what you said in regards to our view of politics, that you and I are both like, we are at the very beginning of this journey.
Hmm.
Like we said at the beginning of the first podcast, we realize how much we don't know. But I think there's value in, along the journey of learning, you need to remain humble enough to continue to learn and to realize I don't know everything. And you also need to not like stand behind opinions so strongly that you start representing them just because you've already invested in those ideas.
Yeah,
I feel
sure.
like that's just a terrible cycle, and that's probably what determines like 90% of people's politics.
Hmm.
um, so, but at the same time, I do think there's a value in trying to figure out what you do think is right, and saying it and
Hmm.
stating that and working it out, and then later on you can work out, oh yeah, I thought this when I was 26. It's kind of dumb. I didn't really know all these things, so I've changed my opinion.
Yeah,
Um,
without a doubt, we'll look
so
back on
yeah,
it that way.
Exactly. And so in light of that, I feel like we can be perfectly comfortable to just, say what we think with it. I think, um, yeah, in regards to politics, like I know some areas you and I would both be a lot more passionate about and a lot more knowledgeable about. Like we're both pretty interested in politics. And so we listen to a lot, we study a lot, we read a lot about different political ideas. So, yeah, well, like what are some ideas and some things going on in the world today and in politics today that you are passionate about?
Mm,
I know you mentioned abortion last time was something that like it was something that you could dedicate your life
mhm,
um towards like trying to change the system of children being aborted before they're born.
mhm.
So that's definitely one. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the number one big political issue that comes to my mind. Yeah, it's completely wrong in my mind. It's a horrible atrocity that we've been aborting so many babies every year for a really long time in our country. Um, yeah, I just because of my where I stand spiritually too, I just think there are such grave um, implications that come along with that. And so, yeah, I would love to see our country move in a way more pro life direction. I would love to see a
Mhm.
country where uh, abortion doesn't happen, and you know, to as close to like we were talking about last time, as close to conception as possible. If we're thinking like literally right now, most I don't know if I should say most. I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party are in favor of abortions even up to very late term. Well, and there are people who
Right.
um I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both stand on the side of abortion at any point, even up to birth. I believe that's where they're both at. So yeah, I'd be really passionate to see that drawn way back. I know that we live in this democratic republic, and so it's probably not realistic to hope for zero abortions to happen.
Mhm.
Obviously, that would be my ideal. But yeah, I think what I would love to see happen politically is to have that the limitations on abortion be pulled back to as early as it could possibly be pulled back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the case with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I don't know if either of them have been that explicit. And I think it's important to draw that distinction between somebody who's explicitly going to say something like that and someone who kind of just, you know, doesn't quite
Uh-huh.
say what their policy is. But both of them say they subscribe to the DNC platform, which for the last 8 years or something has been pretty explicit. It does say abortion up to 9 months, abortion up to birth, which yeah, it's actually insane. It's actually crazy. There's not a single I don't think there's a single human being who could look at the process of a baby like developing right up to birth and then being born
Mhm.
and also uh also want, to actually watch that process and then also want to have that kind of freedom granted to end that child's life. So I think it is a pretty small minority of people who
Mhm.
are fighting for, up to 9 months, but it's the loud minority, and they happen to have a really vocal voice in terms of politics.
Yeah.
It-
Shout
I don't
your
want to get
shout your abortion.
shout your abortion, exactly
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. Something I heard from Dan Crenshaw was about um, how in politics it really sucks, but people who aren't like really loud, they just aren't going to have that much power in, like, there's this idea that the silent majority has most of the power, and people who are reasonable have a lot of power. They can vote in people who are reasonable.
Mhm.
But the way it actually has happened in policy, on a local level and on like a governmental level, is that people pay attention to the craziest and the loudest opinions, and so what you get
Hmm.
is like a graph. And if the graph represented people who are on the left and right, and how like excited they are about their policies,
Mhm.
then it's like a smiley face. And so the more excited you are on the left or the more excited you are on the right, that's how much more like influence you have
Mhm.
to politics, which yeah, just it sucks so much because then the conversation is a really polarized conversation when most people don't feel nearly that polarized.
Mhm.
Yeah. So do you think like from yeah, you I guess that's pretty clear. You would just say pull back abortion laws. So you would say even from the governmental level, I'm putting words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Go
You would
ahead.
say that because it is a life and because one of the only roles of the government is to protect life, that they should be protecting that life by the rule of law. And so if it came to it, the government could hold a gun to somebody's head to say, do not kill this person because that's a human being in there. Like say a doctor who wants to perform abortions, that the government could pull them off and put them in jail for doing, for trying to do abortions. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah, me
to
too.
to be to be yeah, just when you said put a gun to somebody's head, that's your way of saying that's the ultimate authority of the government to say something is,
Yeah.
"Hey, you have to do what we say." That's not
That is
literally
what the
I'm
government
not
is.
I'm not literally saying that you should bust in and put a gun to somebody's head, but
Yes.
ultimately, I
Thank you for
guess
being
I
clear.
guess we also kind of are though at the same time, because if it really came down to it and it was about saving that life, then yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, that
Yeah. So
that's
let's before you go on, let's just be clear with that. What I'm saying is you're comfortable with the government holding a gun to somebody's head in the same way you're comfortable with the government holding a gun to someone's head to get their taxes. What I
mhm.
mean is if you obviously most of us just get a letter with we have to pay our taxes, then we go pay our taxes. What happens if you don't pay your taxes? Eventually people show up at the door with a gun. What happens if you don't go with them? They point the gun at you. So it's
Yeah,
like that's the progression. And so that's
yeah,
kind of like the steelman case of the libertarian view of, trying to keep government out of everything.
yeah.
So anyway, go on.
No, that's and it really is. It's kinda crazy that that's actually the reality. Like, it actually is. We don't always think of
Hmm.
it that way, and I think that's, there's that general distrust of government because government is made up of imperfect people. So I think that's part of the idea. Libertarians, true libertarians, would be all the way to the right on that, and just say, "Hey, you know, keep government out of literally everything," which
Yeah.
is really anarchy when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
Being
That's
a
anarchism.
libertarian is ultimately taken to its furthest extreme. That's anarchy. Um, but I think a lot of the ideas behind America is, hey, that's inevitably going to happen. There's going to be some measure of corruption. The government shouldn't be trusted with too much power, so keep government very small. And
Hmm.
in my opinion, we've gone way past that. So that actually takes into another point. You're asking what I'm just passionate about politically. That's another major thing for me that I see. I am definitely in favor of a much smaller government than exists right now.
Hmm.
And for sure don't want to see it get any bigger. So I'm naming right off the bat here two subjects which I'm most passionate about, pull me towards the right politically. Abortion is
Yep.
a huge one for me because I see that as thousands and thousands of people every year who are not having their rights protected. And so the second issue, the size of government, I'd love to see it shrink. I would love to see that happen, go in that direction. Um, and because I see us already having moved significantly past the size of government that our founding fathers had in mind. Not that they're perfect people. When I just say our founding fathers, it can almost have this like American religious kind of a sense to it. That's not how I mean, but clearly they have done a lot of things right in the founding documents to get us to where we are. And so yeah, that's another big thing for me is I'd love to see government pulled back in a number of areas and just overall
Mm.
have a much smaller budget. Would love to see the national debt worked on to get that thing down. I don't like that it's there, looming in the background, and
Hmm.
increasing the size of government is not going to be the way that we get out of debt.
Yeah, okay. Do you have things that you've determined in your mind that you would like to be cut? Like, are there specific things that you're like, okay, this is what needs to change to get that size of the government down? Because I think a lot of people would probably agree. I actually, the way it works out in polling is something like almost it's something like a majority of people agree with the social programs, and then the majority of the people also agree with shrinking government.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like,
Yeah,
well, those two go hand in hand.
right.
So, do you have anything that you feel like is clear, like this needs to be done not at the government level so we can shrink the size of the government?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for starters, I think there are a number of national programs, federal programs, and I really don't know what I'm talking about with this. This is just my interpretation of it right now. It seems like there are federal programs that would be better off being state programs, and for states to take on the responsibility of deciding how those programs run. So that's one thing.
Hmm.
So you're asking, are there specific things that should get cut?
Like healthcare. Let's get straight into healthcare. Do you think that healthcare should be subsidized? Do you think that part of it should be subsidized?
Hmm.
Do you think there's a way of dividing healthcare into things that should and shouldn't be subsidized by the government?
I think that there should be a social safety net in healthcare. I think there should be some kind of program that doesn't let people bleed out on the street because they don't have insurance or they can't afford to pay for the hospital. I don't think that that should happen in America. And so I think that, there needs to be some social safety net of grace to catch people. I don't think that we'd be living in a very moral society if we didn't have something like that. Forget who said that, but you can judge the morality of a society by how they treat the least among them. Something like that. It's probably not exactly the wording. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So no, I
Yeah.
don't have a lot of specific things with healthcare. I just don't know enough to know what should be cut. But I just think
Yeah.
Medicaid in general as a program could be significantly smaller. Um, the most glaring thing to me, and a lot of countries don't have to factor this into the equation in the same way that America has. Um, I think our military spending is just absurdly too high. I think,
Yeah.
forget the numbers. I wish I knew better. Why I wish I knew any statistics about this, but I just know that
You guys spend
America's
more on your military than the next five countries combined.
there. It is. There's a good. I knew a couple of things like that were bouncing around in my mind, but I couldn't put my
Hmm.
finger on them. Okay, wow. So we spend more on our military than the next five countries all put together. So that to me is like way out of control. I think a lot of the budget problems. I don't know the numbers. I should look more into this and figure it out. But it seems to me, just from even knowing that if we even made that like, hey, let's just make it as much as the next two countries after us combined, or even maybe just like a little
Hmm.
bit more than the than whoever's in second place. I just feel
Yeah.
like we could do something like that and still have this really robust military. And so
Yeah.
that one seems obvious to me.
Yeah.
No matter what you think, even if you think America should have the most dominant military in the entire world, and you're in favor of that, you could still say like, okay, but we probably don't need to spend that much money on this military. We could probably tone
Yeah.
this back at least a little bit. And so yeah, it feels like a really obvious area to me to cut some spending.
That's great. I totally agree with you, which I was not really expecting us both to fall exactly in that spot. Let me read to you some statistics.
Oh, here we go.
The United States actually spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. I thought I heard
No,
five
the
countries,
next
but it's
10
10.
combined.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my
so
gosh.
America spends annually. So maybe what is this? 2008, 2019, $732 billion, and the next top 10 countries is accumulated to $726 billion, and that is China first, which is huge. China is like a third of that.
Okay.
um, and then beyond that is all just tiny little things. India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Brazil. Not surprised that Canada is not on that list.
No way.
Our 2 airplanes don't cost that much.
Yeah, no. You get those 2 airplanes, and then all the rest of the budget just goes to pay for free stuff.
So
for you guys.
here's something. Yeah, exactly.
Goes to pay
Here's
for
something.
free stuff because it's actually your
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, what's that? There's some phrase I heard. I love how this whole podcast is all like stuff that we heard and we don't know who to like attribute it to. I heard a phrase like politics gets corrupt when the politician realizes that he can bribe the people with their own money.
Yeah. Oh man, gosh.
Is that good? Yeah.
Uh,
So, but yeah, honestly, this thing about Canada not having a military, I honestly think that's actually kind of a big deal. It's like we actually just rely on you being a good big brother. And so you, Caleb, as a taxpayer, you pay for a lot of things that I actually benefit from because I don't have to have like military spending because Canada doesn't really have a military. Sorry, Canadian military people, you're not real. You're not real. You're not good enough. Try harder. um, but like we don't really have to have a military because we always just go, oh, if something bad happened here, America would just like come to our defense. Totally true. And so yeah, it's kind of hard even with healthcare and stuff like that. It's hard to parse numbers when we don't have much of a military budget because we rely on you and your military budget. So even comparing like healthcare systems from Canada to America can be, tricky for that reason.
Right. Wow. So we could cut military spending in America by over 50%. We could cut it in half and then some, and we'd still be spending more on our military than any other country in the world.
Yes,
that
is correct.
Crazy.
Yeah, but even still, like that's 360 something.
I wonder how far that would go.
$1 billion.
Like, I wonder what the numbers are for like, these other social programs comparatively.
And we should. As far as I understand, I think your budget is like your military spending is 20% of your budget. And I'm pretty sure that your entitlement spending is 60% of your budget, like give or take a few percentage points.
Okay.
And so, your entitlement spending is really where you are spending your money.
Yeah.
Like beyond everything else.
Still though,
on welfare and
still
stuff.
though, I mean, if it's 20% of the budget, we cut it in half. That's 10% cut off the budget. That's still a really big deal.
10% of debt that we're not putting on our kids. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you with that. And I like that you are, even though you lean towards conservatism, and I would actually say part of that's your personality and part of that is just the upbringing that you had. And then on top of that is the reasons that you gave, the things that make sense to you. But yeah, so I think that's a good little beginning to the conversation. I should probably stop grilling you at this point.
No, go for it. You got anything else in there? Anything you want to ask?
I don't know. Yeah,
it's gonna be documented for all of time. We're gonna look back when we're 50 and be like, what did I think at 26?
Yeah. I mean, the main things would be the things that you know a lot about, the things that you're passionate about, and I think so with abortion. So you would basically just have things pulled back as much as possible. So you would, more or less, you would make abortion illegal. Would you want there to be punishment involved in that? Like, obviously, you have to enforce. So would that punishment fall on the mother? Would that punishment fall on the father? Would it fall on the families or the doctor or what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it clearly would have to be enforced. So I think the only people you could reasonably put that on would be the mom and the doctor, unless there was, I mean, same with like if somebody commits suicide and somebody talked them into it, that person's in trouble too, clearly. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be the same thing. Probably most cases would end up being a punishment for, the mom who's actually having the abortion, the doctor who's performing the abortion, and then if there was somebody else who was like in on the decision or really pushing for it, or I forget I can't remember the term for that. It's not collusion.
Like an accomplice to murder?
Yeah, I don't think accomplice is, but that idea. Yeah, the legal term is escaping me, but
are you talking about manslaughter?
No, it's an actual, like, term for the person who can, like, in a case of suicide, if somebody's convinced them to commit suicide, there's a name for the person who does the convincing, and I can't remember what it
Yeah,
is.
okay.
Um, but, yeah, so I think that's probably how it would play itself out. And so,
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
for including our last conversation about abortion too, um, I would say I'm not 100% settled on whether that is, you know, as much as possible from the moment of conception, or if that is somewhere around like a week or 2 weeks or somewhere in that
Yeah.
range. But I would be incredibly happy to see it come back from where it is to, you know, in that area of, like, let's say 2 weeks, and then we'll go from there and figure out if
Mhm.
going from the moment of conception is even more uh morally ideal or not. But for sure,
Yeah.
let's, I'd be in favor of taking it to that point, um and then, going further from there.
Yeah, I think you lose a lot of definitely a lot of pro-choice people and even a lot of pro-life people in the conversation about the punishment towards the mother because the automatic sympathy goes straight towards the mother. And so I think a
Mhm.
lot of people just generally it's like, okay, I can't support that. Like even though I don't want that child to die, I also don't want like some 17-year-old girl who's gotten pregnant, like maybe she was raped, maybe whatever.
Mhm.
Um, rape cases are only 1% of abortions, but still, like,
Mhm.
what about that 1%? What about those, those thousands of cases?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I feel like
It's not the main
there's at that
discussion, but
point,
it's worth talking about as well.
yeah. So I feel like that's yeah. I think we generally just agree on a similar range that somewhere between like 0 days and 14 days, there has to be a line that's either drawn at a state of the pregnancy. So maybe you could say at implantation.
Mhm.
That is once there is implantation, if it's happened, beyond that, we have to call it murder or we have to call that illegal, and before that it is okay. I think that's a perfectly fine way to do it. Another way to do it would be to try and roughly assume the exact day of the conception because it's hard to get an exact date on
Mhm.
that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and then from there confer like 2 weeks or
Mhm.
something like that. But yeah, I think as long as there aren't human beings with um yeah, human beings like you and I with brains and nervous systems, and they feel the pain, and they have hearts that are beating and fingers and eyes, and like as long as they're not being killed, I think you and I and a lot of other people would be just way happier as long as that group of babies is not being murdered.
Mhm.
Then like the rest we can kind of work through and we can make compromises and stuff. But man, it's just so hard.
Mhm.
And but yeah, it's also hard to like draw that line because it almost feels arbitrary to draw the line. It's so much more clear to draw the line at like birth. After
Mhm.
birth, it's like boom, that's such a black and white line. Like
Mhm.
it is not um it's not a gradient to that point. Like that
Yeah.
baby was attached to their mother and
Mhm.
their mother has rights to her own body. And so, there's kind of an ambiguity to it, which certainly makes it tricky to imagine, enforcing laws and punishing people for those policies.
Yeah, and maybe the scale of punishment would need to be gradient as well. Maybe there would be a different thing to get caught for, this illegal abortion at 1 month as opposed to 3 months, as opposed to 5, 7, 9. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
maybe I don't know. I think
Makes sense.
like a first trimester abortion would be like some sort of punishment, and then go on from there. So yeah, could make sense. But anyway, so I think we stand a lot on a lot of the same ground on abortion. But I want to turn the question around and ask you, besides abortion, we've talked about budget and spending. Obviously, I'm American, you're Canadian, so I don't know how those issues stack up north.
Hmm.
But either in those two areas, um, what are you, how did you see that? Are there certain things with government spending in Canada. I mean, do you want to see the government be smaller in Canada and have less of a role, or are there other things outside of what we've already talked about that you're really passionate about and learning about and want to see change politically in Canada?
Yeah, good question. I think I just want the government to be as big as possible, intrusive as possible, and ruin everything. I'd like to see mass genocide. Um,
Okay, okay.
so I think bigger than any of those issues. A year ago, I would have said the biggest issue was probably abortion, maybe shrinking government. I think actually now
Are
I would
those
say
one
the
and two for
biggest.
you as well?
No, that's probably what I would
A
have
year
had as
ago.
one and two.
Okay.
Yeah, I think something even before establishing those things is the protection of speech.
Mm,
And I think there's a reason that it's
yeah.
so central to the American Constitution. And I guess I've just realized that the value of speech is, in a way, it is the value of the individual. Like our speech is what we have to contribute. And
Mhm.
our speech, the moment you don't think about the value of free speech until it gets taken. And once it gets taken, even just a fraction, then it's like, oh my gosh, I actually can't say things I want to say. And it sounds crazy. It sounds like we could never get there. It sounds like, some 1984 stuff. But the fact is, that has happened over and over and over for all of human history. And I
Mhm.
think a good question to ask with this kind of stuff that I've been asking myself is like, how come I think that we're different today? How come I think that we are just so different from every other society in history
Mhm.
who's gone along the same patterns? And I think there are like vague answers to that question, but there's not a solid answer. And so, because I feel like so many people just think, no, that's like, yeah, they suppressed speech in the German regime, they suppressed speech in the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
and yeah, okay, yeah, like Mao suppressed speech, and yeah, okay, they've suppressed speech basically like in almost every civilization ever, and this is one of the only civilizations in time in human history where speech has been given the central value of freedom.
Mhm.
But there's not that much. Like I feel like a lot of people would say, yeah, it's happened in the past, but that's not going to happen now. Like we are different now, and people just have this general sense that we could never go back there. We could never go back to restricting speech. But I just feel like you have to give me a reason why we're different. If you're going to say that, well, like what makes us different from the Soviet Union? What
Mhm.
makes us different? Is it just that we're richer? Like it's not going to take that much to pull the wealth out from under us. Like it wouldn't take much at all.
Yeah.
And so are you just making the assumption that we'll stay in this like tight little balance
Hmm.
of us being so wealthy and well off that we're going to continue pushing these values? So instead of that mindset, I think a good mindset is just to actually understand the value of speech. Speech is who we are. It is our way of communicating my soul to you, and that's part of why this podcast matters. Is I feel like I say this every time, every episode. I'm like, that's why we need to be doing this podcast. It's like just don't say it, just do it. um, but yeah, I feel like that's the point of conversation, and that's the way that we progress through history. It's like our cumulative, if we can all have the freedom to speak what we believe is true, and if we can be honest about it, and if we can reflect what's deeply inside of us.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so I would say I've probably put at the top of my list now the value of free speech. So I think political correctness and the way that political correctness is starting to have power over free speech.
Mhm.
I would say that is becoming a bigger issue to me than anything else, because
Yeah.
I think that is our most direct path to hell, is probably through the restriction of speech.
Mhm.
And any other path to hell, at least good people could talk about it. At least we could still work our way through it. At least if
Yeah.
we're on that path, we could work our way out of it.
Wow.
If we start on the path to hell through the restriction of speech, then we're just silenced on our way down like the little paved path,
Mhm.
little wide, the
Mhm.
wide paved path.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I feel like that's kind of been a transition. And yeah, Canada's not looking so good on that front. Canada
Mhm.
is literally beginning to restrict certain speech based on critical theory, based on exactly what we're talking about, based on identity politics. It's,
Mm.
there's laws that are passed in Canada, that have been passed in the last 2 years. We're in August. That have been passed in the last like 2 years that are at the core of them the first laws ever in Canada to restrict free speech, and those are the Bill C-16. I'm sure you heard all about.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill C-16 saying, you can't misgender people. Like if somebody wants to be called a certain gender, you have to say what they require you to say. And that's all well and good. Like, I don't mind too much about that. What I hate is the government restricting the speech. I hate the
Mm-hmm.
government just crossing that line. That's a line you don't cross. You
Mm-hmm.
cross that line and you are taking a step towards hell, even if it's in the name of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
The road to hell is paved by good intentions. So
Well, and if we
yeah.
think of the role of government overall as protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness slash like prosperity, possessions, property, like depending on how you interpret that third piece in there, restricting people's speech is an incredible infringement on people's liberty. And so you're not only not protecting it, you are directly yourself as the government stepping in and limiting people's speech to say, hey, no, we're going to be the ones who decide. We're the arbiters of what's okay, what's acceptable
Yeah.
in terms of, popular language. And so, yeah, it's crazy. I honestly haven't really thought much about that living in America. But I will say I'll never forget the time that my wife and I visited China in 2016. And we were visiting some friends there. And there were certain words, as foreigners in China, there's a lot of skepticism around why you live there and what you're up to. Why are you actually here? It's probably have some other intent, and there's just this high level of distrust, especially for Americans, but foreigners in general as well. And so, yeah, people were visiting were American, and so we were really conscious of choosing our words carefully and not saying certain things that might get them into trouble or even kicked out of the country. And I'll never forget that moment of having that conversation with them. And I think it was the first time in my entire life that I had felt like, oh, I can't say this certain thing or the government is going to take action against me or these people and do some kind of, have some kind of response. Yeah, it's a crazy feeling. Do you feel that way in Canada? Like, did that bill C-16 pass? Is that written into
I
law
think
now,
that's
or?
so it passed. I think that's Ontario provincial law. I don't think
Okay.
that anything like that is proposed in BC, but it is like that is the step.
Yeah.
That is the step in the process. No, I don't feel like that at all, and I hope that throughout the course of my life I never give in to, if that becomes like the law. I think it's much better for the citizens to rebel in their actions than to go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be like, maybe there's a much better path, which would be a silent rebellion of people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I guess it wouldn't be silent. It'd be them speaking, people continuing to say things that they believe and then getting in trouble for it,
Yeah.
maybe being put in jail or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that would be a much better path than to forsake future generations to the legislation of
Mm-hmm.
restricting free speech. Because once you start on that road, like China would have so much issue getting back to, I mean, I shouldn't say getting back to, but getting to the kind of freedom
Mm-hmm.
that you have in America. And I think it's amazing how in the Hong Kong protests, how they were waving American flags.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, yeah, okay, when you get to a real oppressive system, you wave the freaking American flag.
Yeah.
Like, the whole world wants to hate on America. The whole world wants to hate on all of your, all of your issues and
Mm-hmm.
your leader and everything. And, I just thought there is something so truthful about the fact that when things really hit the fan, the American flag was the one that was being waved in Hong Kong. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's in such opposition to, like, crowds of thousands of people in the Netherlands coming together to hold solidarity against American racism. It's like, you can oppose American racism, you can whatever, but there's some sort of an unequivocal, like, okay, whatever you think about American racism, how come nobody's how come nobody's upset about literal concentration camps happening right now in the middle of 2020
Uh-huh.
in China? How come nobody's upset about
Yeah.
people groups like
Gosh.
the Uyghur Muslims, I think they're called,
Yep.
being shipped off to concentration camps and castrated? Like, this is not a part of regular conversation,
Mhm.
to the point that I don't even think I've heard that be talked about in the last like 2 weeks. It was just
Yeah.
like a little blip in the news. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, there's
Man, that's
something to that.
crazy. I can't
It's crazy.
believe that does not I can't believe everybody doesn't know about that. I almost
They're too
wonder
busy worrying about like American racism because this is such a massive,
exact
huge systemic problem. And I'm not commenting on that, and I'm not avoiding comment on that. What I'm saying is there's other issues. How come we're not caring about those, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it just makes me think, we're living in a time where things like this are happening. There are people groups in China who are being actively sought out and taken to these concentration camps. Like this is happening right now. There are
Mhm.
millions of Uyghur people in concentration camps in China.
Is there really millions?
I probably shouldn't say millions. You should look that up. Fact check me really quick. For
Okay.
some reason, I had like around 2 million as the number in my mind, but let's make sure that I'm not exaggerating. Um, Regardless of whether it's 2 million or 200,000 or
Right.
20,000, the fact that there are this people group being persecuted this way, um, is unbelievable. And it's how do we not see this as one of the most obvious forms of evil in our present day? How are we not all aware of this? How are we not all longing for justice to be done and for corruption to be uh, dismantled in China and for freedom to
Yeah.
be established? As you're
Yeah,
looking
it's
that up,
insane.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's insane. It's just insane. Uh it's absolutely irrational. And that goes back to the whole critical theory thing, that
Hmm.
it's about the narrative, and it's about,
Yeah.
this is the narrative, this is the injustice. And as much as you believe in that injustice or not, uh in terms of like how much is that injustice similar to the narrative of the injustice, like, is
Hmm.
it really the kind of injustice that it sounds like? Are people literally being hunted down in the streets?
Hmm.
Do even, despite whatever you think about that, it would be logical to care about its, so what I read was a
Okay.
million people in the concentration camps in China right at the moment. It's something like that. Um
I'm sure that they can't
yeah.
know for sure because it's not like the Chinese government is reporting statistics to anybody. So I'm
Mhm.
sure that's just a best estimate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it looks like. But
Man, yeah, it's oh pretty unbelievable.
anything else before we only got a few minutes here, so anything else you wanted to grill me on? I know I grilled you a lot longer than you grilled me.
No, I just would want to give you the opportunity if there are any other pressing issues. So, would you line those up as one, two, and three for you right now? Would you say free speech in Canada is a maybe the primary concern? Beyond that, how would you stack things up? So, you mentioned size of government and
Yeah,
abortion
it's a good question.
are really key issues. I guess exact rank order doesn't matter, but are those still
Uh-huh.
big issues in your mind? And are there any others you'd want to add to that list?
Gun rights. So I would say, first would be speech. Second would either be the abortion issue or the gun rights issue.
Hmm.
And then beyond that would be just generally shrinking the size of government. When I say government, I don't mean local government. What I mean is the overarching overhead government, the spending,
Hmm.
the power that the overarching government has. So to the degree that the federal government controls things that the province could control or that the city could control, I would like that to be changed. I think that's a really bad path to destruction. So right
Hmm.
now, for example, coronavirus relief funds, the government just takes billions of dollars out of the pockets of the public, and they're just giving out $2,000 a month to anybody who, as long as they don't work, as long as they don't contribute to society, then they will take that money out of working people's pockets and give it to you know, as long as you don't make more than $1,000, they'll give it to the rest of the population. I hate that that's a reality. I hate that
Mhm.
that is happening in this country. I hate what it's doing to the country that my kids are going to have to call home.
Mhm.
And you know, they in a lot of ways they'll be privileged to call home. I shouldn't just say that they have to call it home, but like
Mhm.
in a lot of ways it's a privilege. They'll be, you know, they'll be living off of the riches of previous generations' wealth and wisdom in the same way that you and I are. But there's also a lot of debt and destruction, and you know, the dollar. I don't think there's any way that the American dollar or the Canadian dollar can survive the like stimulus that's been chucked into the economy at the moment. So it's like
Mm.
it really sucks that they had the power in the first place to do that. And so when you really get down to the bottom of the issue, it's not like, oh, this policy was bad, or oh, this lobbyist was bad, or this politician was bad. It's like, no, the fact that they have that power is the core issue. And so yeah, so I think that's a huge thing. So maybe I would say just the top four would be yeah, the restriction of speech, stop it. Abortions, just stop it. Gun rights, give them to me.
Stop taking them.
Yeah, stop taking them, and then government shrink it.
Nice. Yeah. Well, so there we have some of our primary political concerns laid out on the table.